University, Amaravati, Andhra Pradesh. KRR Gandhi Garu, Professor, Department of IT and Management, Institute of Management, Geetham. Professor C. Umashankar Garu, Professor Retired, Department of OR and SQC, Rayalaseema University, Kurnool. Senior professors and dear participants. On behalf of Department of Mathematics, Institute of Science, and Center for Learning and Sustainability, Geetham, I welcome you all to the third day of 1 week online international faculty development program on recent advances in mathematics and statistics. Today we are having two invited talks. First one, sequences of real numbers by Kannan sir, and the second on relevance of data science in mathematics by Professor KRR Gandhi Garu. Now, I call upon Dr. Ramesh Sirisetti to introduce Professor Kannan Garu.
Thank you, Shirisha Garu. Good evening, dear participants and panel members. It is my great privilege to introduce today's speaker, Professor Varadarajan Kannan Garu, listed as Northwest Math Educator and Researcher by the biography Director of American publisher Marcus Bosto. Professor V. Kannan received his bachelor and master degree in mathematics from Madras University and awarded PhD from Madurai University in 1970. He is a recipient career award in Young Scientist UGC in 1981, National Lecturer Award in 1985. After serving Madurai University as a lecturer reader for 6 years, at Central University of Hyderabad for 33 years in various distinguished positions as a reader, professor, dean, and the pro vice chancellor, he joined in SRM, Andhra Pradesh, where he is currently working as professor and head. Professor V. Kannan is specialized in analysis and topology. His research interest includes like link between topology and category theory, topological dynamics in chaos theory, discrete dynamical systems, and oriental invariance topology. Ordinal invariance in topology. He has more than 70 research publications. He is editor of Indian Journal of Pure and Applied Mathematics. He has prepared video cassette lectures on parabolas, Keren-Mellman theorem, squares, cubes, and powers for UGC country-wide classroom, and on compactness and continuity for Andhra Pradesh Open University. He has co-authored textbooks for class 11, 12, 4 volumes of NCERT textbook on calculus by IGNOU. He has edited a book named Fractal Wavelets and Geometry in association with Professor Bensley in the year 2015. He is a lifetime member of Indian Mathematical Society, Indian Science Congress Association, and Ramanujan Mathematical Society. He served as UGC nominee in the advisory committee as well as in the government board of reputed universities and colleges. He served as chairman CSR Advisory Committee for Bhatnagar Award in Mathematical Sciences and Chairman DST Committee for Swarna Jayanti Fellowships. He served as President of Indian Mathematical Society 1992 to 1993, Section President of Indian Science Congress Association in 1994. Professor V. Kannan is recipient of Srinivas Ramanujan Award by Indian Congress Association from the Prime Minister of India in 2006. He also received Dr. Sanjeev Roy Sharma Award in the Sanjeev Roy Ganita Award in 2009. He was elected as a Fellow of Indian Academy of Science, AP Academy of Science, and Council Member of Indian National Science Academy. He has served many national committees and has delivered lectures in mathematics to non-specialist audience at a number of colleges and universities. Apart from science, he had also contributed to English, Sanskrit, Tamil literature through more than 30 talks in All India Radio. Served series of more than 200 literary articles in monthly magazines, books, and audio cassettes, and participating in Vedvant Sabhas. He is honored with the Doctor of Literature, Vachaspati from Rashtriya Samskrita Vidyapeeth, Tirupati in the year 2016. Dear participants, with this brief introduction, I am glad to invite Professor V. Kannan Garu to deliver his lecture on sequences of real numbers. Welcome, sir. Professor Kannan Garu. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ramesh, for your nice introduction. Welcome to all the participants. I am now going to talk about some beginning topic in real analysis course, that is on sequences of real numbers. The beginning itself, I will share the screen now. Is the screen visible to you? Yes, okay. This is about sequences of real numbers, very beginning of real analysis. And I start with the question, why should we study this chapter? The observation is at least 3 major courses, one on calculus, another on real analysis, and the third on theory of metric spaces in topology. These 3 courses completely depend on the study of sequences. And sequences of real numbers is the first beginning model. Then we will go to sequences of complex numbers, sequences of vectors, sequences of elements in metric spaces, etc., modeled on our sequences of real numbers. In particular, in calculus and real analysis, we have notions of limits, continuity, differentiability, and so on. Every one of them depends on the study of sequences. More than that, the very construction of the real number system. If you ask what is a real number, it is easy to answer what a rational number is. But if we complete the gaps in the studies space of rational numbers, we get the set of real numbers. To describe that, to explain that, we need the sequences of real numbers. Every real number is introduced in one of the methods as an equivalence class of a Cauchy sequence of rational numbers. Therefore, the very real number system is introduced through sequences. Or I will put it in a different way. Suppose I introduce a real number in a different way, say as an infinite decimal. For every real number, there will be an infinite decimal, something like 1.414, etc., or 1.333, ... etc. What we really mean is a sequence of real numbers there. How? If you consider 1.414, etc., then I take a sequence with first term 1.4, next term 1.41, next term 1.414, and so on. This becomes an increasing sequence of rational numbers, and the limit of that increasing sequence of rational numbers is considered as that particular real number. Thus, real numbers are introduced through sequences of numbers. There are applications elsewhere also, not only inside mathematics. I am giving 2 examples here. One example is in economics, Pareto efficient allocation in economics. What is this? This is a situation which occurs in many places where many individuals are competing, and we want a situation where everyone has maximum satisfaction, in the sense that in this situation, if one individual criterion we improve, we increase, then automatically another individual criterion will become worse. And therefore, if you leave it uninterrupted, everyone is in some kind of a maximal situation. This situation is called Pareto efficient allocation, and the problem is whether in a particular problem, this occurs in many situations, whether in a particular situation, whether there is a Pareto efficient allocation at all is the question. For that, we use the properties of sequences of real numbers. There is a favorable theorem for economists that Pareto efficient allocation is always existing, and there are methods to approach to almost to say how to reach a Pareto efficient allocation. For this, we use the study of sequences of real numbers. Another is a problem which also occurs in many fields. In many problem, I want to find a root of some polynomial approximately. For that also, nowadays we use numerical methods. There is something called Newton-Raphson method and so on, which is becoming very efficient in most of the cases. But to understand it, what we really do there is we construct a sequence of real numbers approaching that root of the polynomial, and therefore we apply the study of sequences of real numbers there also. Thus, there are many problems outside this chapter where we apply the results of this chapter. How do we write a sequence? How do we give examples of sequences? This itself can be done in many ways. One way is to describe a formula. Here I have given an example, f of n equal to 2n plus 3. If I put different values of n, I get different terms. Therefore, the first term is 2 plus 3, that is 5. Second term is 7. Third term is 2 into 3 plus 3, 9, and so on. 5, 7, 9, etc. is written by this formula. Many a time sequences are given by formulas like this. Sometimes a sequence is given by a recurrence formula. There is no explicit formula for the nth term, but I will tell you how n plus 1th term is constructed if you know the previous terms. In this example, I have given n plus 1th term equal to nth term plus 2 divided by the nth term. This is some example, but this example I have given because I'm going to discuss it a little later about this. There can be other kinds of formula. N plus 1th term can be expressed in terms of nth term and n minus 1th term. Previous terms, anything of them, these such formulas are called recurrence formulas. This is one way of describing a sequence. There is yet another way. Sequences are described as sequences of partial sums for a series. In fact, every sequence can be written as the sequence of partial sums of a series. That's not important for us, but that is one way of describing a sequence. Or sequences can be defined through convergence of continued fractions. A little later, we will see one example. There may be many other ways to describe a sequence. Sometimes we can describe like this. The nth term is the nth term in the decimal expansion of the number pi. Then this gives a sequence of non-negative integers. And this is only to convey that there are many ways to specify how a sequence of real numbers is described. The first notion here is about the limit of a sequence. Sometimes we say a sequence is converging to one particular point. Some other times we say that this sequence is not converging. We say that a sequence is converging if there is a limit for that. What is a limit of a given sequence x1, x2, x3, etc.? Roughly speaking, limit of this sequence is that point, that real number near which almost all the terms of this sequence are lying. But this is too rough a statement because near is a fuzzy term. How near we have to say. Therefore, I want to make it less roughly, saying that whatever neighborhood of that point which is the proposed limit, for that whatever neighborhood you take, in that neighborhood all but finitely many terms will be there. Only finitely many terms will be outside. What is a neighborhood? Neighborhood means think of an open interval with that point as the center. I will state it differently. When I say xn converges to x, I use the symbol xn, then arrow symbol and x. Then what I mean is, for all r positive, I consider the interval x minus r, x plus r, x is the proposed limit. This is a neighborhood of that x. In this open interval, all the terms will be lying with the exception of finitely many. There are only finitely many terms outside this interval. Same thing I can express. There is one particular term beyond which all the terms are here, before which some terms may be outside. When I write it in symbols, it becomes, for every epsilon positive, this epsilon is same as the r that was taken in the previous sentence. for every R positive, that also we can say there is an N naught in N, this is one particular term, such that after that term, if you take any other term in the sequence, it will be in this neighborhood x minus epsilon, x plus epsilon. In other words, the distance of that nth term from this point x will become less than epsilon. For all epsilon, there is one such N naught. If this happens, then I say that this x is the limit of this sequence xn. And because this is already familiar to you, this definition, I'm not spending more time on that. I'm interested in the behavior of the sequences. First, a sequence cannot have two different distinct limits. If at all the limit is there, it will be unique. What may happen in a bad situation is that limit may not exist. But there is no way of having two distinct limits. This is roughly because if you give two distinct points, I can separate them by two disjoint open intervals. Then our requirement is, except finitely many, all the terms should be in this open interval. Similarly, if this is also a limit, all the terms will be in this open interval, but they are disjoint. This is not possible. Therefore, there cannot be two distinct limits. Another important proposition is that every convergent sequence is bounded. Bounded means there are two numbers, say small m and capital M, such that all the terms are between them. Unbounded means there is no such bound, either upper bound may not exist or lower bound may not exist. Then the supremum of that sequence will be infinity, or the infimum of that sequence will be minus infinity. In such a situation, we say that the sequence is unbounded. The proposition here is, if you give a convergent sequence, it has to be bounded. Roughly, the reasoning is, it is having a limit. Take a neighborhood of that limit, say with a radius 1, say. Almost all the terms have to be there. Outside of that, there are only finitely many terms. Among the outside terms, there will be a largest. In this way, I can use that to provide an upper bound for this sequence. Similarly, there will be a lower bound for this sequence, because outside this, there are only finitely many terms of the sequence. Next major theorem is that every bounded monotone sequence has to be convergent. Here, monotone means either increasing or decreasing sequence. If it is an increasing sequence, if it is bounded above, then it will converge to its least upper bound. If it is a decreasing sequence and if it is bounded below, then it will converge to its greatest lower bound. In either case, monotonicity is enough to assure convergence among bounded sequences. Another result is, every subsequence of a convergent sequence is also convergent and the limit is also same. This is easier to believe because if there is one limit for the whole sequence, that means in every neighborhood of that, near that all the terms of the bigger sequence are lying, then it goes without saying that for the subsequence also all the terms have to lie here only. Therefore, we get the same limit. Limit of a sequence always lies between its infimum and its supremum. Sequence has an infimum, sequence has a supremum. That is where the terms are there. For the terms, there is an infimum and a supremum. And the limit will be somewhere between the infimum and the supremum. The possibility of being equal to the infimum or supremum is also included. It has to be between that. This is a short Venn diagram which puts in a nutshell, summarizes three of the propositions that we saw in the previous slide. I have used the capital letters S, M, B, C here. S for set of all sequences of real numbers. M for set of all monotone sequences of real numbers. B for set of all bounded sequences of real numbers. C for the set of all convergent sequences of real numbers. These are just the first letters of the four words: sequence, monotone, bounded, convergent. Then The previous slide proposition says that every convergent sequence is bounded and therefore this set C is a subset of the set B. Another proposition says every monotone bounded sequence is convergent, but bounded sequences may or may not be monotonic. Therefore, within the square named S, I draw two other squares. The shape of a square is not important here. You can draw like an ellipse also. Sometimes in Venn diagrams are drawn like that. There is a set B, which is also, all the sets are inside the set S. There is a set B denoting bounded sequences, another set M denoting monotone sequences, and these two are overlapping. B is meeting M. Partly B is outside M also, partly M is outside B also. That means not all bounded sequences are monotonic, not all monotonic sequences are bounded. There are some which are both bounded and monotonic. But the previous result says bounded and monotonic sequences have to be convergent, and therefore this common portion between B and M, it has to be inside C. Therefore the picture has to be, the picture of C has to be something bigger than this B intersection M and something inside that B, and therefore I have drawn the picture like this. We find that C intersection M is same as B intersection M, and C is something in between B and B intersection M. It is inside B, but it contains B intersection M. This kind of picture Venn diagram helps us to remember those theorems in a different way. Now I start with a sample problem on sequences of real numbers. This is a recurrence sequence given by a recurrence formula. First term is given as 2. Then a recurrence formula is given how to calculate the n plus 1th term if you know the nth term. This formula is n plus 1th term is half of the nth term plus 2 divided by the nth term. Looks somewhat artificial, but if you look at the geometry behind it, you will see what it is saying. But let us go ahead with that now. The problem is it convergent? If so, what is the limit for this sequence? We can calculate a first few terms. First term is already given as 2. Second term is according to this formula, half into 2 plus 2 by 2. It becomes 3 by 2, 1.5. We started with 2. We have come to 3 by 2 now. Next term, half of 3 by 2 plus 2 by 3 by 2. 2 by 3 by 2 is 4 by 3. Half of 3 by 2 plus 4 by 3. That is the midpoint of 3 by 2 and 4 by 3. And therefore, we are going a little more than 3 by 2. And so on. Now, I'm going to prove that this sequence converges. But what is the idea? This is of course worked out in many books. I took this problem from a book by Abbott, A-B-B-O-T, Understanding Analysis, a very well written book for real analysis. I'm first proving that all the terms are more than root 2. Instead of bringing root 2, what I have written is the square of all the terms, that will be more than 2. If we take the first term 2, its square is 4, that is more than 2. If we take the second term 3 by 2, if we square it, it becomes 9 by 4, it is 2.25, therefore it is more than 2. But how do we prove that all terms are more than 2? For that, this is the method, I prove it by induction. Suppose the nth term is more than 2, then the n plus 1 term will be half into something more than 2 plus 2 by something more than 2. But that is n plus 1th term. It is more than half into 2 plus something. But if I square it, square of the n plus 1th term, half into xn whole square will come there, 2 will come, plus something 2 by xn. A little calculation says that square of that is already more than 2. After proving that every term satisfies this property that the square is more than 2, I use this fact to prove that it is a monotonic sequence. Nth term is, let us see now, first term is 2, second term is half into 2 plus 2 by 2, 3 by 2. We have come to 3 by 2. I am saying next term is still less, next term is still less, and so on. After having proved that it is monotonic, in the proof of monotonicity, I need this fact that xn square is greater than 2. Using that, I prove the monotonicity. That is to prove that xn plus 1 is less than xn. It is already half xn plus something, half xn plus 1 by xn it is. That 1 by xn I want to prove is less than half xn. I cross multiply, it amounts to proving that xn square is greater than 2, but that's what I have proved here. 2 is less than the square of xn. Therefore, to prove the monotonicity, I use this step. It is a monotonic decreasing sequence. All terms are positive. Therefore, it is a bounded monotonic decreasing sequence. Therefore, it is convergent by a known theorem. Now I have to calculate the limit. How do I calculate the limit? Here, a little algebra I am doing. Suppose L is the limit, or I will say suppose A is the limit. Suppose M is the limit. Then I use this formula xn plus 1 equal to half into xn plus 2xn. This xn plus 1 is converging to M. That will be equal to half into this xn is again converging to M plus 2 divided by this xn is again converging to M. I close the bracket. M equal to half into M plus 2 by M. Here I am using some known result that if xn converges to some M, then half times that will converge to half times M. 1 by xn will converge to 1 by M, such things like this. This M is not 0, I have to assure myself before putting it in the denominator. But that is already clear to me because all the terms here were more than root 2. Therefore, the limit also will be at least to root 2. Therefore, this will not be 0. I can put it in the denominator. This satisfies M equal to half into M plus 2 by M. If I multiply throughout by M, this equation becomes M square equal to half into M square plus 2. If I bring to the same side, this becomes M square is 2. The previous one gets simplified as M square is 2, and therefore we know what M is. It is root 2. Therefore, we have found the limit of this particular sequence. Root 2 is the limit. While finding it, how many results did I use? I used the results that monotonic bounded sequences are convergent. I used the algebra of limits theorem that If an converges to a and bn converges to b, then an plus bn will converge to a plus b. That I have used. Similarly, scalar multiple that I used by limits 2 by x and reciprocal sequence will converge to the reciprocal of the limit. I have used those algebra results, algebra of limits results, and the previous slide result. Then finally, I was able to find the limit. This sequence given by this particular recurrence relation is converging to the number root 2. Now I take another sample problem. This time I am not taking from Abbott's book, but I am taking from some other book. Here is one more sequence. First term is given to be 1. Second term is given to be 1 plus 1 by 2. The third term is given to be 1 plus 1 by, instead of 2, I am putting 2 plus 1. Then it becomes 1 plus 1 by 3. More generally, the sequence is taken from the continued fraction 1, 2, 1, 2, etc. What I mean is, if I want the next term, it will be 1 plus bracket 1 by 2 plus 1 by another 2. It will go on like that. Now the question is, does this sequence converge? If so, find the limit. This is a typical problem from the theory of continued fractions, where again the sequences of real numbers play a major role, and 2 centuries ago people have used continued fractions to understand the theory of real numbers itself. There, instead of the infinite decimal way of representation, we find more advantages in this continued fraction representation of the real number, because in infinite decimal expansion, what happens? Some 1.19999 etc. is equated to 1.2000 etc. Such things do not happen in continued fractions. It is a better expression. There are some advantages in using continued fractions, advantages that are not available in using our infinite decimal expansions. Here, I am observing first that if you take alternate terms, first term, then third term, then fifth term, then seventh term, and so on. Here, first term was 1, second term was bigger than that, third term was smaller than that, fourth term was bigger than that, fifth term is smaller than that, and so on. Here I am finding, if you consider as it is not a monotonic sequence. But if you consider the odd terms alone, it is becoming one monotonic sequence. And if you take the even terms alone, it is becoming another monotonic sequence. One is increasing, the other is decreasing, and they are converging to the same limit. Then that becomes the limit of this sequence. In all sequences which come from continued fractions, this will happen. Next major theorem in the chapter on sequences of real numbers is named after Bolzano and Weierstrass. Its statement is very simple. If you take any bounded sequence, there will be a convergent subsequence. Every bounded sequence is having a convergent subsequence is a short statement of the Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem. It has equivalent statements. Let us not worry about it. We are going to indicate many proofs of Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem. There is one advantage in learning many proofs. Each proof will have an idea, and that idea will prove something more than what we started proving. In this way, the subject is developing. We are learning more about the sequences in our effort to prove Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem. This Weierstrass is a German mathematician. He is considered as the father of modern analysis. This modern analysis includes real analysis, complex analysis, and many other analysis, including functional and numerical analysis. This Bolzano is from Italy. He was a logician, philosopher. He was also a Catholic priest. His native language is German. He was not famous when he was alive. He became prominent later after his death. And we hear his name in two contexts. One is intermediate value theorem, another is Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem. Whereas Weierstrass is a more accomplished mathematician, his name we will hear maybe 20-30 times in our analysis course. Now, I just want to indicate how can there be so many proofs for a single theorem to prove that every bounded sequence has a convergent subsequence. My first proof is, first I will prove that every sequence has a monotone subsequence. This will be a major part. Then if you take a bounded sequence, its subsequence, bounded monotone subsequence will be there. But every bounded monotone sequence is convergent is something that we have already seen. Therefore, that subsequence will become convergent, and this gives one proof of Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem. There the crux of the proof is, how shall we prove that every sequence has a monotone subsequence? For that I am going to give some idea now. I look at one term, suppose the first term is A1. I'm just asking a question. Is it a peak term? I'm asking, is this term peak? By that what I mean is, this is like a mountain peak. Peak means the topmost point. Is it the topmost element of this sequence? The topmost here means largest. Or are there larger elements? Both answers are possible because there are too many bounded sequences. In some sequences, the answer may be yes. In some other sequences, the answer may be no. But I am asking, if it is a peak, note it. Take it for your subsequence. Then go to A2. I am asking the same question, is it a peak? But only thing is A1 has already been removed. In what is remaining is A2 is a peak. Similarly, I go to the third term. I am only theoretically doing it. A term is called a peak term if all later terms are smaller than that. If this is the biggest among the later terms. Then again I am asking, how many peak terms did you get? I am doing it theoretically only. All possible answers are that there may be 3 peak terms, there may be 4 peak terms, there may be infinitely many peak terms, all possibilities are there. Suppose there are infinitely many peak terms, then my argument becomes simple. Take those peak terms, it may be n1th term, n2th term, n3th term, etc. You form a subsequence. That subsequence is automatically monotonic because the first term in the subsequence was a peak term in the previous sequence, and therefore all the terms that we have written later, they are all smaller than that. Particularly first term is bigger than the second term. Similarly, second term is bigger than the third term because second term was also taken as a peak term. In this way, we find that these peak terms themselves form a subsequence which is monotone. In this case, it was easy for me to prove that the sequence is having a monotonic subsequence. If you ask me what is the monotonic subsequence, it is just the subsequence consisting of peak terms. I omitted the non-peak terms. That was as easy as that. But what will I do if there are only finitely many peak terms? Then what I am suggesting is, omit those finitely many terms and go far beyond that. After you take a term after which there is no peak term at all, take that as your subsequence. Because it is not a peak term, there is something bigger than that later. Take it as your second term. Because that is also not a peak term, there is something bigger than that later. Take that as your third term and so on. In this way, we are constructing a subsequence which goes on increasing because none of them is a peak term. The term that comes next to it is still bigger and so on. But in this case also we got a monotonic subsequence. Therefore, in both cases, we got a monotonic subsequence. Only difference is, if there are infinitely many peak terms, I got a monotonic decreasing subsequence. If there are only finitely many peak terms, I got a monotonic increasing subsequence. In either case, I have proved that there is a sequence, there is a monotonic subsequence. This result I first took from a book of mass, but later I find that this result is available in some other books also. My colleague Professor S. Kumaresan has written a book where he is explaining this theorem very well. My colleague at Hyderabad University. Now this gives one proof of Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem. First apply the first result, get a monotonic subsequence, and now you are saying your sequence is bounded in Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem. I start with a bounded sequence. That bounded sequence, if it is having a monotonic subsequence, that every bounded monotonic sequence has to be convergent, and I have proved Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem just by this. This is one proof. I'm going to indicate another proof now. This is a more familiar proof because many of the books are giving this proof. This proof is called proof by bisection. Bisection means dividing into two. You start with a bounded sequence. There is a lower bound, there is an upper bound for all the terms. That means there is an interval AB, closed interval AB. A is a real number which serves as a lower bound for the terms of the given sequence. B is a real number which serves as an upper bound for the given sequence. Therefore, the interval AB contains all the terms. Now, I divide this interval into two equal parts, taking its midpoint. Two subintervals I divide. Now, my sequence, some terms will be in the left half and some terms will be in the right half. And I do not know whether finitely many or infinitely many are there. But I know one thing, together there are infinitely many terms. I take one half where there are infinitely many, at least in one of them there have to be infinitely many terms, because if both were finite, then totally there will not become infinite. Therefore, I take half of this interval, which may be a left half or right half, depending on the sequence, where there are infinitely many terms, and I continue this process. That half of the interval also I divide into two equal halves, and I take one where I get infinitely many terms of the sequence. That is further bisected, divided into two, and so on. In this way, I construct a subsequence. How do I get a subsequence? First, I took one half where there are infinitely many. I choose my first term there. After that, I divided it into two parts, and I took a still smaller interval where there are infinitely many terms. I choose my second term there. In this way, whenever I bisect this closed interval and choose one in which there are infinitely many terms, I choose my next term there. In this way, I form a subsequence, and it is easy for me to prove that in the subsequence thus formed, the terms are becoming very close to each other, because this originally there was some length for this closed interval, then all terms from the second term onwards are having distance less than half of this length, because they are chosen in one half of that. After that, from third term onwards, all the terms have a distance less than 1/4 of this, because they are chosen in a still smaller subinterval, everything. This makes the sequence, chosen subsequence, a Cauchy sequence, and therefore it has to converge. Or we can use the nested interval theorem. First I started with a closed interval, then a still smaller closed interval inside it, then still smaller closed interval inside it, and so on. This becomes an example of a nested sequence, decreasing sequence of closed intervals. There should be a point common to it. In this case, there is a unique point. That becomes the limit of this sequence. This is a more familiar proof of Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem, available in plenty of books. Sir Isaac Newton, famous physicist and mathematician, said once that truth is ever to be found in the simplicity, not in the multiplicity and confusion of things. Don't make your proofs complicated. Show very simply what is the main idea. Here in this bisection method, we are choosing terms of the subsequence one after the other, but they are coming nearer and nearer to each other. That is the main idea. This whole proof looks simple. Here is a third proof. Form the set of the sequence, that is, some terms may be repeated, take them only once. The set, this set consists of those elements which are coming as terms in the sequence. Sometimes this set may be finite because too many things are repeating. If it is finite, we are able to find a subsequence. Some term is repeating infinitely many times, and therefore I get a constant subsequence. If this is infinite, we can first prove that every bounded infinite set has a limit point of E by another method, which is also due to the idea shown by Bolzano-Weierstrass. If you take that limit point, then you can construct a sequence section converging to that from E, because for every limit point of a set, we are proving in our first course in real analysis, there will be a sequence from that set converging to that. If you take that sequence, that will become a subsequence of the original sequence. If you take a little more care, you can make it as a subsequence. This is one more proof. There is yet another proof where I don't need the ideas of topology at all. Just with the order theory I can make. Take some real number C and ask the question, less than C, are there finitely many terms or infinitely many terms? For some elements C, you will get the answer only finitely many. For some others, you will get the answer infinitely many. Because this is a bounded sequence, if your C is below that lower bound, then below that there is no term at all. There is no term is same as is a part of saying that there are only finitely many terms, there are only 0 terms. I am taking those numbers also. I form a set like that, set of those numbers below which there are only finitely many terms. Using the boundedness of the sequence, I have proved that this set is non-empty. Because it is a non-empty bounded set, there will be a supremum for that set, which is called the completeness axiom. Take that supremum. Because it is a supremum of a set like this, by the very property of the supremum we are proving in real analysis, there will be a sequence from this set, from these terms, which converge to that. You get a subsequence of the given sequence, and Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem gets proved. The last proof, fifth proof that I am giving is modeled after an idea given in the book Goldberg Methods of Real Analysis. This also seems to be very easy. You take a bounded sequence, then for a given n, omit the first n terms, and for the remaining terms, which is called a tail of the sequence, for the nth tail of the sequence, take the supremum. Because it is a bounded sequence, supremum will exist as a real number. Do it for every n. Give a name mn for that supremum. Then these mn's themselves will form another sequence that will be easily proved to be a decreasing sequence. For that decreasing sequence, take the infimum, which is a limit of that mn. Now, consider two cases. This infimum, which is denoted by x star here, ask, are there infinitely many mn's greater than that, or only finitely many? If there are infinitely many greater than x, by the way in which mn is constructed, we can choose a decreasing subsequence of the given sequence converting to that x star. That x star becomes the limit point. If mn becomes equal to x star for large n, then we can choose an increasing sequence of xn converging to x star. Details are given in Goldberg's book, you can see. Here, we are not using many of the earlier results. That is why I like this proof. Actually, this proof has something to do with the notion of lim sup, limit superior of a sequence. This x star becomes that. Carl Weierstrass, who is behind this theorem, He did not prove the theorem first. The history says Bolzano proved it first for sequences of real numbers. Karl Weierstrass supplemented to that proof. After Weierstrass' idea, we are easily seeing that this order is not important. Even for complex numbers, we can give a proof. Some of these proofs will not extend for complex numbers. For example, method of bisection, etc. This cannot be done for complex numbers. Anything that uses the order cannot be done. Monotonicity cannot be done. But Weierstrass succeeded in proving it in several other spaces. He says, a mathematician who is not also something of a poet will never be a complete mathematician. Why does he say that? How does it fit here? There should be imagination in the brain. Mathematician should have a feel, should have an intuition for what is happening. Most proofs are discovered by converting to geometry. Some kind of a picture should flow in our minds. That is why I draw the Venn diagram there. That picture gives that C is inside B, B is inside S, and B intersection M is inside C, and so on. Similarly, whenever a sequence is converging to a limit, our mind should imagine that there is a row of numbers going nearer and nearer to that point X. Some intuitive feeling should be there. Then the power of imagination should be there. That will add to your intuition. Then you can give a proof. Mathematicians discover new theorems because they have some traits common to the poets. Now I am trying to understand Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem, not the proof, but the statement alone. If it says every bounded sequence has a convergent subsequence. If I take the bounded sequence 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1 alternately, then I verify, yes, it is true. Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem is true in this case, because if I take the constant subsequence 0, 0, 0, etc., omitting the ones, I get a convergent subsequence. If I take another sequence 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem is not applicable here because this is not a bounded sequence. And actually, this is not having convergent subsequence. Also, this makes me appreciate Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem better. If I take the sequence 1, 1 by 2, 3, 1 by 4, 5, 1 by 6, etc., so that is in the even number of terms, I take the reciprocals, otherwise I keep the number as it is. Then this sequence is unbounded because 1, 3, 5, etc., big numbers are coming as terms. But this is also having a convergent subsequence because 1 by 2, 1 by 4, 1 by 6, etc., that converges to 0. Therefore, this gives a supplement to the Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem. Even some unbounded sequences can have convergent subsequences, but bounded subsequences should have. Unbounded subsequences can have. Some of them will have, some others won't have. In this way, supplementing Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem through the results got through these examples, I appreciate it better. Now I go to another sample problem. I thought that at least 5 minutes I want to chat with you at the end. Therefore, I'm keeping this as my last problem today. The problem is, I'm constructing a sequence. This is known as the sequence of partial sums of a series. The series is 1 plus 1 by 2 plus 1 by 3 plus etc. plus 1 by n plus etc. There is a name for this series. It is called a harmonic series. For the harmonic series, first n terms alone I am taking, and their sum is called a partial sum of this series. I call it Sn. Sn is thus the sum of the reciprocals of the first n positive integers. What is the problem now? I want to prove that Sn is not convergent. How will I prove that? The terms are becoming smaller and smaller. Therefore, if I intuitively think, it seems to converge. First to 1, then 1 plus 1 by 2, 3 by 2, then I am adding a still smaller term, 3 by 2 plus 1 by 3. Because terms are very small added, maybe I am thinking I will not go beyond 1000. It is bounded. Once it is bounded, it has to be convergent. But sometimes our intuitive things fail. we finally find that it is not convergent. How do we prove that? We prove the non-convergence, that is divergence, by showing that it is not bounded. Every convergence sequence has to be bounded. This is not bounded. How do we know? There is no upper bound. How do we know? I am doing like this. 1 is here, half is here. Next 2 terms I am taking 1 by 3 plus 1 by 4. Maybe I will write here 1 by 3 plus 1 by 4. Next 2 terms I have taken. I am making an estimate. I am saying this is more than 1 by 4 plus another 1 by 4. How do I know that this inequality is correct? This 1 by 4 I kept as it is, but instead of 1 by 3 I wrote 1 by 4. I know that 1 by 3 is more than 1 by 4. But this one is easy to calculate. I am calculating this is 1 by 2. What I have observed is if I add the third and fourth terms, it is more than 1 by 2. Next I observe, if you take 4 terms later, 1 by 5, 1 by 6, 1 by 7, 1 by 8. If you add by a similar method, I can prove that that is also greater than 1 by 2. Next, if I take 8 terms after the 8th term, 1 by 9, 1 by 10, 1 by 11, etc. And if I add by a similar inequality method, I will prove that that is also more than 1 by 2. Now, I am grouping this. Second term is 1 by 2. Third and fourth together, more than 1 by 2. Fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth together, more than 1 by 2, and so on. Several groups are more than 1 by 2. Therefore, this sum is going to be more than 1 plus 1 by 2 plus 1 by 2 plus 1 by 2 plus 1 by 2. But the sequence is unbounded. If half is added again and again, it goes on without any upper bound. That's no. Therefore, there is no upper bound for this sequence. Therefore, I conclude that this is unbounded. Now I am looking at the time. We have only 3 more minutes. I am aware that there is one more lecture for you today. Therefore, I stop now. And I am now asking you to interact with me if you like to ask questions, etc. in the remaining 3 minutes. I welcome questions or comments from you.
Okay, sir. Sir, there are some questions from the participants, sir. What is the contribution of Mesopotamian from ancient history in sequence of real numbers?
Okay. The subject, sequence of real numbers, its study is very old, even 1,000 years before.
Sir.
These seeds are sown in ancient mathematics. Now, who is the person who asked the question?
Mahesh Kumar Panda, sir.
Mahesh Kumar, what did you ask? Did you ask about these things in ancient things? Is it what you asked, or you asked something specific about economics question problem? Is it? I want to get.
He is unable to speak, sir, because there is no option to speak for participants. Only.
I see. Okay. If you ask whether there are ancient texts in which these sequences are studied, there are plenty. There is a very old book called the Sulba Sutra, in which already seeds are sown for the study of infinite sequences and infinite series, approximations, construction of real number system, etc. They are also interested in a special kind of sequence where the numerator will always be 1, denominator can vary 1 by 2, 1 by 3, 1 by n, etc. its subsequences, maybe 1 by 1000 plus 1 by 2000 plus 1 by 3010, etc. These are called unit fractions. They were interested in unit fractions and expressing all numbers through the sums of the unit fractions. Such problems are available even in Mahaviracharya's Ganit Sarasangra. I hope I have very partially answered the question.
One more question, sir. Is from Dr. Srikanth. Real sequence can be convergent, divergent, or periodic. His question is, what is the minimum number of terms required to tell about its convergence, divergence, or periodic nature?
Okay. I have understood the question. Suppose I am practical minded, I can go to a calculator, take the first 1000 terms, normalize. From that, how to conclude whether it is going to be convergent or divergent or periodic. The answer is, unfortunately, there is no such minimum term. In fact, one can prove that it's not possible. Going to any number of terms, even if it is too big a number, after that it can become eventually monotone and convergent. First 1000 terms may be erratic because we are allowing all kinds of sequences. Therefore, the answer to your question is, for this practical application, unfortunately, there is no possibility. There is no minimum number of terms which will decide the behavior of the sequence. The eventual behavior of the sequence can be different from the behavior of the first few terms, however large these first few terms be.
Thank you, sir. One more question, sir. Dr. P. Panbhushan Rao. He has a function like y equal to maximum of 0, x, where x is a real number.
Please repeat the question. Function is maximum of
0, x, sir.
0, x, maximum of 0, x. Here we have a function, right?
Yes, sir.
Right.
Is it possible to construct or find an alternative function to this existing one?
I did not
function or sequence. That's okay.
I did not get the question completely, but I agree with the first sentence, and that is a function. For every x, it associates maximum of x and 0, which means that if x is positive, it will keep it as it is as x. If x is negative, it will replace it by the value 0. Yes, that function is there. What is the question there?
Alternative function, actually. He wrote only alternative.
I'm not getting the question correctly. Is it something related to sequence also? In sequence also, we sometimes do that. If there is a sequence which consists both positive terms and negative terms we replace by 0 and then get another sequence. In this way, one sequence can be written as the sum of two other sequences, where first sequence is consisting only of non-negative terms and the second sequence is consisting only of non-positive terms. Something what we do for functions, there is a similar theory for sequences also. After all, sequences are also functions, only the domain is n, set of natural numbers.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. These are the only questions from the participants, sir.
Okay, thanks to the participants for their patience.
Thank you very much, sir. On behalf of Geetham, we are privileged to honor Dr. Professor V. Kannan Garu, a renowned mathematician, a motivational speaker, a superficial and great humanist on this occasion. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Thanks a lot, sir.
Thanks to the organizers once again.
Thank you, sir. Over to Shirisha Garu. Shirisha Garu?
Yes, Andy. Okay.
Clicking stop share.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Once again, thank you, sir, for your enlightening lecture on sequences of real numbers. Really, we have learned a lot. And I now request Dr. M.V.R. Kameshri Garu to introduce the next speaker, K.R. Gandhi Garu.
But just stop viewing, sir. Stop sharing, sir.
I have already stopped sharing.
Thank you, sir. మరి అదేంటిది అది ఆయిందా
I now request M.V.R. Kameshri Garu to introduce K.R.R. Gandhi Garu.
Good evening, respected professors, dignitaries, and participants. I deem it a great honor and